Atheist Nomads episode 406. That's not even a heartbeat.
The podcast you're about to listen to includes cursing and talking about hoo-haws. Please be advised.
Welcome to the episode of Atheist Nomads. I am Dustin, and it's just going to be me today. So before we get going, got a couple announcements. Oh, I guess it's an announcement. And then I'm actually going to do the feedback first before we get to news. Lauren is taking a step back from the podcast. She's not going to be gone. She's just going to be going more to being a semi-regular guest as opposed to a co-host. And with that change, it brings back to mind that, I've been needing to rebuild the show since Aaron left. But I've been, and it's been over a year, and I've basically just been in a holding pattern. And I haven't been able to figure out quite what I want to do or how to do it and still stay sane. I had a plan, I announced it, and then I never implemented it. And I might be trying that again. So while I work on this, I do plan on continuing to release weekly episodes, but they'll be shorter, and I'm going to experiment a bit as I figure out what to do. The current model I'm looking at is each episode will be a single thing. It will be news or dusting off the degree or an interview. And some weeks there will be more than one episode, and some weeks there might not be an episode. Most likely it will be episodes every week, and most likely it will be one episode every week. But I'm going to play around with it, and hopefully it is a change for the better, but we'll see. And in the feedback, these were both about Richard Dawkins. Adam Ogre Boatswain via YouTube wrote, "Serious question. I just got God Delusion by Dawkins. I know he is problematic, but can the book be valuable when separated from his idiocy?" And that is something that I think is really worth talking about. It is a serious question. And I'm personally of the opinion that cancel culture is a myth created by the right to try to dismiss liberal outrage. And I don't believe that someone being an asshole or an idiot in one area completely negates their life work in unrelated areas. This was specifically an issue with what really prompted the larger discussion was the American Humanists Association's decision to rescind Dawkins' award. Most people who were still following what Dawkins was saying already knew he had turned into a pretty typical old white man saying old white man things, and were ignoring him. But the American Humanists Association, in trying to, as it enters into a new era of its life, as it transitions into finding and moving on with a new executive director, they're having to figure out who and what their organization means now. And Dawkins' problematic statements that he keeps making on Twitter reasonably prompted them to make a decision. And I agree that Dawkins no longer, if he ever did, exemplifies humanism. I think he probably did, but in the last 5, 6, 7 years, he hasn't. Atheism and humanism are not the same thing. Secular humanism implies atheism, and a lot of atheists are humanists. But not all humanists are atheists, and not all atheists are humanists. And I think there should be room within the atheist discussion for people who are not humanists. I do think that it is still reasonable to criticize people in the atheist movement and larger, broader community and discussion to be criticized by people who are humanists for saying things that are the antithesis of what humanism stands for. And while whether or not going out and buying a new copy of one of Dawkins' books and him getting royalties off of that, whether or not that's something that you would be willing to do at this point in time is entirely up to you. I personally have no opinion on the matter. As far as reading works that he has written, absolutely. The God Delusion is a really good book that is a fundamental part of the modern atheist movement. Even if the movement has moved beyond Dawkins, that book is still a critical element of it. So yes, you should still read it. And from Bob via comment on the website, what Bob says is problematic, but I am going to read it verbatim and then respond. Quote, as one who does have a dog in this fight, I think your comments about Dawkins and about any of us who even dare to agree with him are incredibly harsh and reactionary. My adult son informed me over a year ago that he is trans and is now in the process of hormone therapy and has requested that from this point forward we address him as her and use her new chosen female name. So that's it. Almost 40 years of addressing him by the name I gave him, and now I'm expected to just fall in line, even though I am still quite skeptical of this diagnosis and process. No, I am skeptical, and the only problem with Dawkins' tweet is that it was unapologetically reasonable. Shame on you for such hostility towards Dawkins. End quote. I am responding publicly because you posted this publicly, and I have some important things to say to you. Your child is almost 40. I'm 37, so around the same age as your child. By the time you're in your late 30s, and I'm sure you remember this from when you were in your late 30s, you're usually self-sufficient, you have your own life, and making time for family, unless you have, with the exception of children, of the people in their 30s living in their own homes, requires effort. If you are a dick to your daughter will stop putting in the effort to spend time with you. You are skeptical of this diagnosis. You need to swallow your skepticism if you want your daughter visiting you when you're older. You're probably in your 60s or 70s now. You're going to want your kid to keep visiting you and to keep calling. If you don't call her by the name she's asked to be called, then she won't call you. And the area where your anger should be is that she'd been going through this for years, going through a very difficult time of self-discovery and finding that identity, and didn't tell you. You weren't on the in. You weren't in the in group that got to help with that process. You were instead at the end when she was ready to come out to the world. And that should hurt. And you should work on rebuilding that relationship with your daughter. Idaho was the second state last week to sign into law heartbeat bills. Oklahoma was just a couple days before Idaho. And these are the so-called fetal heartbeat bills. They are all being passed with a triggering clause that sets at what point does a bill like this going through the courts, winning, cause the state to actually start enforcing these laws. And these laws are bans on abortions if a fetal heartbeat can be detected. The terming, the use of language to describe this is bullshit. Because what these laws are is banning abortions from the point that you can detect the yolk sac pumping proto-blood to an embryo. There is no heart at that point. It's not really blood at that point. And it's the yolk sac that is beating. It is something that is so weak that it requires a transvaginal ultrasound to check for this, which means this is a transvaginal ultrasound law too. And that so-called heartbeat is detectable at 6 weeks of gestation, which means for a woman to get an abortion requires closely monitoring her period, taking a pregnancy test as soon, if she's late, taking a pregnancy test as soon as the results would be at the earliest point that the results would be reliable, and then get in to get an abortion within days. These are effective, absolute abortion bans. It creates a test that is not a complete ban, but it really is, because yeah, good luck getting into a doctor in a couple days. The only way that abortions would still be possible is if it's same day walk-in abortions. And if you've got a waiting period too, well, that just makes it more likely that the yolk has developed a pulse. What Idaho's bill has as the court trigger for this law to be enforced is any appeals court in the U.S. ruling in favor of a heartbeat abortion ban. That is highly likely to happen. There are circuit courts that are very conservative. Trump personally appointed something like a third of all appeals court judges because of McConnell's refusal to confirm judges for Obama, holding openings open, such that in 4 years, he got like 10 years worth of judges through. And every appeals court, well, most appeals courts have more than 3 judges, and a lot of appeals courts have more like 10 or 15, or if you get to the Ninth Circuit, there's like 70 active judges. And the appeals court decisions are made by a 3-judge panel that are randomly selected, which means there is a reasonable chance that 3 Trump appointees will be randomly selected by an appeals court somewhere in the country. And Trump's appointees were selected largely because of having the opinion that they needed to overturn Roe versus Wade and make abortions illegal. So as soon as the lottery comes up in favor of these, and it's really just a couple rolls of the dice until it happens, this will go into effect. One of the things that, now, of course, they do have exceptions. The Idaho bill does have exceptions. There's medical emergencies. So this would avoid situations like happened at a Catholic hospital in Phoenix several years ago, where a pregnant woman was having a miscarriage and needed to get the dying fetus removed. And the hospital refused to do it because there was a heartbeat. And by the time the heartbeat stopped and she was able to get the medical care she needed, she had developed a really nasty infection. Having the medical exemption in here at least will avoid that issue. There's also an exemption for rape and incest, but to get access to the rape and incest exemption requires getting a report from a law enforcement agency or child protective services to give to the abortion provider, which means if you get raped and you get pregnant and you want to have an abortion, you have to be watching very closely. You have to report it to the police immediately and then watch for pregnancy very closely and hope that you can get in before that heartbeat, the yolk sac starts pulsing, or you have to get the report from the police in hopes that they complete their investigation before the baby's born. And this is bullshit. Pastor Robin Bullock is a pastor and self-proclaimed prophet who predicted that Trump would win the 2020 presidential election. He's co-founder of Youth Force Ministries Church International and hosts a prophetic YouTube program called The 11th Hour. And he had this to say.
You can pray for a man named Joe Biden. You should. Don't get off in hate. You should pray. Okay? You can pray for the office of the president, but you cannot pray for President Joe Biden, because you might as well pray for the Easter Bunny, because he don't exist. And there's no anointing. And if you celebrate it or congratulate him, you've entered into his sin.
So he thinks that Biden isn't president, that the election apparently didn't happen, that he didn't actually win, that he wasn't anointed by God to be president, because this guy made a failed prophecy. His argument is basically because he prophesied that Trump would win, that it's not possible that Biden could be president. And I can't say I'm surprised that somebody who's deluded enough to view himself as a prophet would be deluded enough to still be denying the election results. All right, Lauren's actually going to join us for the last bit of the news here. So,
hello.
Welcome, Lauren.
Better late than never, right?
Yep. So yeah, it's been a couple hours since the last part that I recorded. So, yep. All right, so Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont signed legislation that will end the religious exemption for mandatory school vaccinations starting in the 2022 school year.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this started, like in his written statement about it, he wrote, quote, "When it comes to the safety of our children, we need to take an abundance of caution. This legislation is needed to protect our kids against serious illnesses that have been well controlled for many decades, such as measles, tuberculosis, and whooping cough, but have reemerged. In recent years, the number of children in our state who have not received routine vaccinations has been steadily increasing, which has been mirrored by significant growth in preventable preventable diseases across the nation.
Yeah, that's not coincidental.
Right. And yeah, when you look at it, it's like there used to just be 2 states that didn't have any exemptions other than medical, and that was Mississippi and I think New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And now California and Connecticut and a couple other states have now joined in with that.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Because of the big issue being states have been, there was threats of lawsuits on, you're allowing religious exemptions. Well, what about my exemptions for people who weren't religious but were anti-vax?
Oh,
or couldn't make religious arguments.
But just didn't want to.
Yeah. And so that has really been abused by growing numbers of people. And yeah.
The misinformation alone is just mind-boggling.
Basically, since the internet age started. Getting all that.
Before that.
Yeah.
Basically, for as long as there have been needles, people have been anti-needle for some reason or another.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's obviously gotten so much worse.
Right, because there was even anti-vax people back in the 1800s. There have always been people who've been against vaccination. But it has really been growing in recent years. Like, there was a point in the 1800s when it was really growing because of the fact that they were using the same bifurcated needle to scrape cow pus into your arm.
Don't you?
And spread syphilis to everybody in the town.
Whoopsie daisy.
So that resulted in some more anti-vax sentiments.
But also it resulted in more clean operations and regulation. So, I mean, yeah.
And, at this point, the latest movement has been really, bad.
The things that people will do to avoid it are, some of them are just criminal. I mean, you watch these Facebook mom groups, and the things that these moms are willing to do to avoid getting their kids vaccinated is just crazy. They'll make up crazy stories and, do all sorts of stuff to make sure the kid doesn't get any chemicals put into its body. And yet there's chemicals in everything. That doesn't make sense.
Right. Like DNA is a chemical.
Yeah.
And we have that.
I guess no more aspirin or ibuprofen for you.
Yeah.
Put the NyQuil down. Yeah, inhaler that saves your kid's life. F it.
Benadryl.
God, I mean, really?
Yeah.
Where do you draw the line?
Right. And it's just this weird thing with misinformation spreading and then just increasing distrust. And also the risk-benefit analysis where it's like, well, those diseases haven't been around in my lifetime, except they are.
Exactly. They're coming back, and that's sad.
Because the global efforts have slowed down. Polio was supposed to be eradicated in like the 90s. And the goal was by this point to have had measles done like 10 or 15 years ago, fully eradicated from the earth, and be moving on to the next one.
Yeah. I mean, eradicated from the earth. And we can't do it because people are fucking it up.
Yep.
And dragging the rest of humanity down with them.
Yeah. Now, when you look back at, say, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, whenever it was the school vaccine requirements were going in, the religious exemptions at that point were only being used by a few people. I think what I've seen for most states was it was basically just about 1% had a medical exemption, and then there was about another 1 or 2% who would have a medical exemption. Christian Scientist or ultra-Orthodox Jewish or weird groups like that. And it was never enough to, when you still have 97% vaccination, that's not enough to impact herd immunity. We've got schools in America that are dipping down to the 60s, 70% range on vaccination rates.
That's assuming they even send their kids to school half the time. There's a lot of gap in a lot of aspects of our society.
Mm-hmm.
It's just one of them.
Yeah. Anyway, so good job, Connecticut, for fixing an issue. Then we've got good news coming out of Alabama.
Oh, right. Oh, thank God. Okay.
So
you don't hear those words very often.
Yeah.
Nice when it happens.
Alabama has just Governor Kay Ivey, who in, I believe it was last week's episode, we covered a law that she'd signed that was bad, and now got a law that she signed that is good.
Oh.
It is replacing the old sex ed standards for Alabama, and she did a really careful job of messaging with this to try to make sure it was focused on updating the science and not get the focus stuck on the removing the anti-gay stuff.
Yeah, because that's how these good laws get shut down. Is somebody finds one thing wrong with it, and then advertise that to everybody to be upset about, and so they have to shut down the entire bill. Happens here in Idaho all the freaking time. That's why we haven't passed any public education stuff, because one person doesn't want kids to learn about critical race theory.
Yeah.
So no education for our entire public education system because of that. Ugh. So good for her for sticking to the science and staying on target with it.
Right. So the law that it's replacing required that teachers, when covering any kind of same-sex sexual activity in sex ed classes, call it immoral and against community standards and illegal.
Oh, well, that hasn't been illegal in a long time.
That was a law passed in 1992. It was still illegal in Alabama in 1992. That law was invalidated with the...
Was that Texas?
2003 Lawrence versus Texas.
Yeah.
That nullified Alabama's anti-sodomy law. So they're finally updating it. Because, at the point that they last wrote that 30 years ago, the having sex with somebody of the same sex was illegal in Alabama. It's taken them 17 years to fix that.
Yeah.
18 years to fix that.
And also saying it's immoral and it goes against societal standards. It's it's not on the same boat as freaking thieving and lighting houses on fire and murder. So if you think it's immoral, maybe you should recheck that and just don't say that.
Yeah.
But that's good that it's updated.
So they are still allowed to talk about the importance of, quote, delaying sexual activity and, quote, discouraging risky sexual behavior.
Well, okay. I mean...
That is replacing condemning students who are sexually active for lacking self-control and ethical conduct.
Oh, yeah. No. What's funny is that, the best way to keep... One of the best thing that correlates with waiting to have sex is sex education.
Right. The more comprehensive, the longer people wait.
Yeah.
In part because if you know enough, you're not going to be as curious. If you don't know, it's Pandora's box.
Yeah.
The Vatican has been working since Pope Francis took over on addressing the corruption in the Vatican.
That was kind of his major thing when he first started.
And not even the corruption in the Catholic Church. Just trying to deal with the corruption in the Vatican itself.
Right.
In headquarters. Because there was so much there. And he hasn't done much to actually try to stop corruption, but has now signed into Vatican law that any Vatican employee will be prohibited from receiving a work-related gift worth more than 40 euros.
Nice.
Work-related makes it vague. That means, yes, somebody can take you out to dinner. That does not mean they can give you a Rolex.
Right. Or an underage boy.
Yeah. Right. And it also doesn't take care of that because...
That's not a problem according to the Vatican.
How do you shouldn't be putting price tags on people. I'm sure some of those underage boys do have price tags.
Oh, yeah. They do. Straight up do.
And yes.
But yeah, the amount of wealth that is distributed throughout the Vatican in the name of, church business is ridiculous.
So this particular rule change is a result of Vatican prosecutors who are 2 years into a corruption investigation involving Vatican investments in London real estate.
Oh, that was the other thing I was thinking. When you first mentioned gifts, I was like, how much of that is related to property?
The Catholic Church's worth is like the value of all of their holdings is insane. People talk about the gold. It's the land.
Yeah. Because like we were discussing this last week here in America, there's this American dream of owning property because there was enough property to give out down the homesteading days and, up till very recently. That's never been an issue in Europe and most of the other world because either a monarchy or a church owned the land.
And it was feudalism.
So it was, you worked the land, but you didn't own it. I mean, that concept is foreign.
Yeah. Even just owning land was not a concept because even the lords had it by the grace of the king.
Right. They didn't even own it.
And even if it was a hereditary been passed down several generations, all it takes is the king saying, I'm taking that back, and it's gone.
Or, the church.
The church did manage to get, like, in Germany, it was something like 30% of all of the land in modern-day Germany was under the church's direct ownership and control. France was similar. Now, in a lot of countries, like France and Mexico, the governments during various revolutions seized all church-owned property, but there are other countries that haven't done that. And even though the church doesn't own anywhere near as much property as it used to, the Vatican City and Catholic Church is still one of the largest, if not the largest landowner in Europe. And some of that dates back to...
Can it be dated back?
1,000 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that being said, real estate... Just like how Donald Trump always had money, even though he lost money doing everything he did, real estate is a great way to launder money.
Yeah, it's not it's not as good a classic as a dry cleaners, but it's
classic for laundering large sums of money.
Right.
If you give €1 billion to the Vatican and they turn that around and buy 600 million pounds of real estate in London and then sell that, the money passes hands enough times and you've got it back.
Obviously the movers and shakers, the big guys know how to do it. It boggles my mind, but that's how the world is run.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, heck, I saw a report recently, Spain is something like 25% of Spain's GDP is in off-book financial dealings, as in black market and money laundering. And they're only that's only the second highest amount of black market financial activity in Europe. Italy still has more.
Well, there's a shock.
Something like 30% of their economy. And how much of that is getting funneled through the Vatican?
I have no idea. But it sounds like a really good way to do it.
Yeah.
Donate to the church.
And it took an Argentinian to decide to try to put a stop to this.
We'll see how far that goes. How has he not been assassinated? I don't know. I guess that is one step too far for... because when he first started and there was all this anti-wealth, anti-corruption rhetoric, I was like, oh, he's going to get knocked off quick.
He hasn't actually done anything, though.
But the talk is dangerous.
It is. It brings more attention to the problem.
Right. But then he stopped doing anything. And
this new rule is basically your standard corporate or governmental gift policy of it can't be of real value and it needs to be small amounts and you need to be careful. Like, I know I have to sign a ethics thing for my job saying I won't accept gifts. It is a huge problem, and how the wheels get greased and how money vanishes, and just stopping big gifts, that's not going to change anything. The real corruption is probably going directly through the Vatican. If this is coming from looking into the Vatican investments, then yeah, the real corruption is in the Vatican books.
Yeah.
It's not gifts to employees, it's gifts to the Vatican.
Yeah, that's just, it was, well, it's exactly how you described it. It's a paltry, corporate, vague,
and changes
inconsequential
nothing.
Wording. Yeah. Well, credit where credit is due.
Mm-hmm. Yes. They did something, and that's better than nothing. It's like a scorecard on U.S. state corruption a few years back. Idaho got one of the worst scores, not because there's any evidence of corruption, but because there's no way of knowing.
Exactly. It's not that they had the lowest score. It's that they did not have a score.
Oh, if it would have been lower if the people doing the study had found evidence of corruption. So they couldn't give them like negative points for that, but they couldn't give them any positive points because there's no way to know. In Israel, the pandemic is still going on, and the pandemic is getting the government to start to rethink how they handle one of their minority communities. You would hope that means they want to treat the Palestinians better, but no. This is making them rethink the special liberties that the ultra-Orthodox get. It's basically, in Israel, there are two sets of laws. There are the laws that apply to everybody, except for the ultra-Orthodox, and then there's the ultra-Orthodox laws.
Right.
There are two court systems. There's the state court system and the religious courts.
That is the Sharia law that people are obsessed with Islamic states. There's the governmental law, then there's the Sharia law, and they're held separate, but barely.
Yeah.
And this is the same case where they're very closely connected, if technically separate.
And so what sparked the latest bit of outrage was an annual festival at an ancient rabbi's tomb on Mount Meron, where they asked for the permits and were denied. They asked for permission. They were denied. They kept asking, and they finally have a small festival. 100,000 people showed up.
Wow.
Packed in. And when the day was done, as 100,000 people were trying to get through the doors, a stampede started and trampled 45 people to death.
Wow. Yep. That's why they got the no in the first place.
Well, they also got a no because they are the most vaccine hesitant group in Israel.
They're the super spreaders.
And while the ultra-Orthodox have had a surprisingly low rate of infection, mostly because they try to avoid everybody outside of their community within their community, when it hits hard because they've been ignoring all of the
preventative measures.
Yeah, all the mitigation efforts. But it all goes way beyond just the pandemic. They're exempt from the military draft. Their schools are not a part of the national school system. Their apartments usually don't have TV or internet. They don't really live in the cities they live in.
Right.
And this has 45 people dead from a gathering that probably ended up being a super spreader event, really has them wondering if the rules that were made when the ultra-Orthodox were just a couple % of the population still make sense now that they are 13% of the population.
Ooh, wow. Well, how does ultra-Orthodoxy like that grow so much?
Babies?
They just keep their women pregnant and in the kitchen?
If every family if you have one of the best healthcare systems in the world and you have 6 to 10 kids per family in a community that is having 1, 2, maybe 3, then yeah.
Yeah. Yep. That's insane.
Yeah. It really is. So yeah, religious radicals are a problem everywhere.
Yeah.
Regardless of the religion.
I'm sure they'll look into it and not do anything because your hands are tied when it comes to religious freedoms just about anywhere in the world.
Yeah. And they have the issue in Israel where the ultra-Orthodox have their own political party and they keep on failing to actually be able to create ruling coalitions in the Knesset to be able to actually form a government. They've gone a couple years now with like 4 or 5 elections and no government actually forming. They keep getting caretaker governments until they can do another election, until somebody can finally get a majority or a
You have to completely
coalition.
rethink elections at that point. Oof. The party systems.
Yeah.
We thought our 2-party system's bad. Sometimes the bigger party systems don't work either for that exact reason.
Yeah.
There's no good answer.
10, 15 parties, 7 or 8 usually make it in, trying to get enough to agree.
Mm-hmm.
The 2 most moderate parties tend to be the main ones that actually get the power, but it depends on whether they can actually get the support of the fringe parties on their side. And for the right-wing, more moderate party, Benjamin Netanyahu's party, if he angers the ultra-Orthodox, his party won't get their support in the government, which means they don't have a chance at being able to form a coalition.
Right.
So yeah, nothing's going to change. Since we already covered feedback, if you want to contact us, you can send us an email at feedback@atheistnomads.com, or use the contact form on the website, or use the SpeakPipe button to leave a voicemail. If you want to support the show, you can find out how at atheistnomads.com/donate. And remember, not all those who wander are lost. Thank you for listening to another episode of Atheist Nomads. You can find show notes and contact information at atheistnomads.com. Follow us on Twitter at Atheist Nomads, and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/atheistnomads. Please subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, or your podcatcher of choice, and while you're there, feel free to leave us a review. Theme music is courtesy of Sturdy Fred. Until next time, this has been the Atheist Nomads.